It's my pleasure to introduce Dave Wolfe, who's a professor of plant and soil ecology at Cornell University and also the co-PI for this New York Soil Health Project. So it's been great to work with him. And he's going to kick us off today.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks, Joseph, and thanks for all your work in getting this organized. Thanks for all of you that are joining. And we're really, so happy that we were able to find the funding to have a new cohort coming along for this specialist training. I think last time was the last time we went through this was really a great success. And so thanks to the Environmental Protection Fund of New York State that helps fund New York Soil Health and administered through New York State Agri Markets, American Farmland Trust, and also Northeast SARE, and who else? Boy, the Soil Health Labs. And we get a lot of support for this. So my job, I guess, is to really kind of I'm very launching speaker here, provide kind of a broad overview, get us all sort of in the mood about soil health. And some of this stuff will be familiar to some of you. Some of you may have heard me talk before. Well, here's some of my favorite little anecdotes, but we'll get it rolling. And then we'll continue on with Janice Teeth, I think, is after me. We'll talk a lot more about soil biology. So first of all, I mean, what's really been kind of cool for me, being at this for, close to 30 years now, is just feeling like I've been sort of a part, an era of really, discovery science, amazing biodiversity and abundance beneath our feet. A lot of this is coming through using new, DNA type techniques to be able to, where we can quantify and identify the diversity of things underground that we weren't able to grow in our old Petri dish techniques. We're doing a lot of exciting stuff, which you'll hear more about regarding cover crops and certain types of crops and innovative management strategies to address certain soil health problems. And also, this era of science discovery has really coincided with a real farmer motivation and recognition on a lot of farms. I think that the organic matter has been deteriorating over generations. They've got chronic soil compaction problems often. So looking for solutions to those things. And also thinking about things like climate change and building resilience to that. And all of this about, farmers wanting to increase their profits, of course. And at the same time, we have, as much as we have farmer interests in soil health, many environmentalists are very interested in soil health. They see its importance in terms of how farmers manage their soils, in terms of erosion and water quality issues, food security and climate change challenges worldwide. So it's been really cool to be part of this. Just a few, we got a few publications here. You'll hear more, I'm sure, about Carl Van Ness's Building Soils for Better Crops. I think it's just come out with a new edition. This is a book I wrote some years ago, Tales from the Underground, about soil biology. We have the Cornell's Soil Health Test book, which we'll be hearing more about. And then Dave Montgomery, a colleague of ours out in Washington, University of Washington, wrote a very interesting book called Growing a Revolution, all about soil health. So a lot of stuff coming out about this on all sides. One thing that really is of interest to me is because it's all stuff that's come out since I was in graduate school, to age myself, I guess you would say. But the way I learned it in grad school was that roots are there to take up water and nutrients for the plants and to anchor the plants in place. End of story. I now know that a huge part of the story is that roots exude substances, exude a lot of things, sometimes in trace amounts, and actually sometimes in a very significant amounts. A fair amount of the products of photosynthesis of our plants are exuded through the roots as sugars. And these actually serve very important functions for the plants. So the roots are just doing this accidentally. It's not an accident of evolution, but some of these are literally herbicides and insecticides that can help inhibit weeds and insects and diseases in their presence. A lot of them are built to attract beneficial microbes. Of course, the most well-known of these is attracting rhizobia bacteria. For legume plants, for example, that get involved in symbiosis with rhizobia for nitrogen fixation. Flavonoids are released by the roots that attract photosolubility to them. Some of these substances help dissolve plant nutrients, making them more available to the roots. Roots also, we appreciate them more for how they create pathways for water, oxygen, and other roots to follow. So you could have a cover crop in rotation with a cash crop, and one of the main purposes of that cover crop could be to create pathways, might have particularly strong roots to get to compacted soil layers, and then the cash crop roots can follow. And then, of course, roots sequester and store a lot of organic matter deep in the soil profile, good for subsequent crop growth, but also storing carbon that otherwise would be in the air as the greenhouse gas, CO2. So there's amazing stuff going on with roots themselves, as well as the soil microbes that you'll hear more about from Janice. So we really pay a lot of attention these days with this area called the rhizosphere. It's a very narrow zone of soil. Really, it's that little bit of soil that if you pull a plant up by its roots, that little very narrow layer of soil, it tends to stick to the roots and the root hairs, really within millimeters. But that's a hot spot of plant-soil interactions involving all kinds of exciting and cool things about microbiota. And the whole thing, a big part of soil health is how do we manage that rhizosphere so that we keep the bad guys in soil, the bad microbes, away from the plants, and maximize the good guys and help our crops grow. A lot of cool stuff going on, a lot of amazing research with that. Just one example of, a rotation crop or a cover crop and how it can be used and the multiple things that we're finding out we can do with these crops. So let's talk about Sudan grass. One reason farmers often might have that in rotation is simply to build up organic matter because it produces a lot of biomass and you can get that back into the soil, help building up organic matter. But we also know its roots exude allelochemicals that suppress weeds and pathogenic nematodes. This benefits not only Sudan grass while it's growing, but also can help protect subsequent crops that are grown in that place. It's also one of these crops that we like to think about as being good in rotation when you've got a chronic soil compaction problem. So yes, you may have to on occasion do some very deep tillage to break up a compacted layer, but you don't want to get addicted to this tillage and just rely on that mechanical thing. If after that you rotate with a crop like this, its roots can really break through compacted soil layers and help improve that problem. And of course, its roots pump a lot of organic matter deep into the soil. So this is what we call kind of a plant legacy effect. It often benefits itself, but also has a legacy effect on subsequent crops. And so how do we manage our rotation sequences to take advantage of this? And for decades, of course, we've known about legumes and nitrogen, but now we're learning about so many other things along these lines. Okay, here's one of my little stories I often like to talk about is Selman Waksman. If you haven't heard about this guy, he's really a pioneer, one of the first real true soil biologists. He's, unfortunately, Cornell can't claim everybody who's a soil biologist and soil health expert. Someone was at Rutgers University, but he grew up on a farm, and he was amazed, growing up on the farm, how seeing, diseased crops being buried into the soil of the farm, even dead animals, and how the soils did not stay poisoned. They actually seemed to remediate themselves. He actually he came up with the term antibiotic. He was convinced there were organisms in the soil or chemicals in the soil that helped to eradicate disease. And he talks in his book that he wrote in his retirement was called, I think, My Life with the Microbes. He talks about how he never was successful at getting a federal grant for this work, never. He talks about some hotshot in Washington, D.C. From a granting agency saying, I can't think of any area of science that's likely to lead us to nowhere soon than soil biology. And so he talked about his satisfaction when he discovered streptomycin in 1943, the second major antibiotic that helped saved many people's lives. In 1952, he stepped up to the podium in Stockholm and got the Nobel Prize for medicine. So a very famous soil biologist. Here's an example of this kind of disease suppressive nature of soils. And so a healthy soil is Sometimes it's a soil that, really where there are very few pathogens in the soil. By chemical means or by rotation or whatever, you reduce the number of pathogens. Or sometimes you may have some pathogens there, but you have other organisms that can attack those pathogens. And this is an example of the kind of little cartoon picture of trichoderma, a soil fungus. It's really ubiquitous, found in almost all soils, attacking the pathogenic rhizotonia fungus, which of course, can be very bad for crop roots. So we want to build up those natural enemies in the soil. So here's, what is a healthy soil? So I want to talk a little bit about that. And first I want to talk about it in kind of this qualitative way. We kind of know it when we see it, you might say. And of course, you'll hear much more about our soil health lab and how we have gone way beyond this in developing a real soil health test fee for service that gives you a lot more detailed information. But well, let me first, maybe I should explain these pictures. What is this freaky thing here? It's not like from the latest, Disney monster movie or something. It's the mouth part of a nematode, which is, one of these tiny, microscopic, sometimes barely visible nematodes in the soil. There's many thousands of species found in a typical soil. A few of them are pathogenic, but many are beneficial. This one is a bacterial feeder, and that's its mouth part. It can protect plants from bacterial pathogens. This is a picture of Rhizobium bacteria who've been attracted to the root tip of a soybean plant because the soybean root exuded flavonoids. Now they're now going to enter that root and set up their symbiosis to give that plant nitrogen. And this is, boy, a much younger me doing some water infiltration work. Anyway, so a healthy soil. This is kind of a, my list of things I think about in a qualitative way. It's a soil that is able to suppress plant disease, insect and weed pests. It's actually suppressive of those. It has a lot of good guys in the soil that help suppress those things. It has plenty of things like Rhizobia bacteria available there to develop beneficial symbiotic associations with plant roots. And in fact, we're now learning, this is a very tight symbiosis, the Rhizobium bacteria with soybeans, but there can be even looser symbioses than those that are like this one with the nitrogen fixers. So again, as I said, plants put out materials that attract a lot of microbes towards them that are beneficial to them. Maybe even just occupying space on their roots so that pathogens can't get on that space and harm the plant. So healthy soils are able to retain and recycle essential plant nutrients, like have a very good, strong nitrogen cycle going, breaking down organic matter at an appropriate rate, not too fast, not too slow, etc. Have good soil aggregation, which improves water infiltration and retention and drainage. So really provides resilience to both drought and flooding. And of course, grower profits and protecting the environment, key part to that healthy soil. But here's our soil health test that has been developed at Cornell. Harold Van Ness has been sort of the main leader of this. I've been involved, Janice Teasley, you hear about it, various faculty, Joseph's involved now, Bob Schindelbeck, you'll meet some of these people. Kirsten, you'll be hearing from all of them. And you'll hear much more about Cornell's comprehensive assessment of soil health, which, if we think about the soil test that our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents grew up with, it really focused almost exclusively on the chemistry of the soil, the pH of the soil, the plant chemical nutrients that the plants needed, but did not pay much attention to the biological and physical features of the soil. And the soil health test does all of those. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because you'll be hearing much more about that in this program. Okay, here's this kind of the story of, what we've done with, over the years with our carbon in our soils. And this is showing this huge dramatic drop. This is from Lal at University of Illinois, who did an analysis of looking, from early 1900s to the 1980s, the amount of organic matter our soils lost in the US, a large fraction of the US, due to just really heavy tillage, over-oxidating the soil, leading to rapid organic matter loss. We're recovering some of this now, But boy, you know, what we'd like to do is get way back up here, reducing tillage, and I'll talk about some other procedures for getting there. We are nowhere near recovering all of this, but we're on the way to recovery. So organic matter depletion and degradation, at least in where we are here in the Northeast, is one of the major constraints to soil health. Of course, in other parts of the world, it can be other things like soil salinity, other problems, but really organic matter is a major constraint to soil health here. Organic matter we really have to look at as, you know, that life beneath our feet is a whole habitat. And organic matter is really the base of the food chain there. It's what really supports the beneficial organisms in the soil food web. There's also fungal hyphae and other sticky substances released by those soil biological organisms that are essential for aggregate stability, holding those little clods of soil together that create good soil tilth, maintain that appropriate soil structure for good water retention and water drainage. So the life in the soil is also involved in creating good soil structure. So the soil biology affects the physical nature of the soil. And we have an aggregate stability test as part of our soil health test that we're going to hear more about. Organic matter is a source of plant nutrients. Of course, organic matter is usually mostly carbon, about 60% carbon or so, but it also contains nutrients that can be slowly released in the ground of the plants. And the highly stable fraction of organic matter, humus is actually kind of an old fashioned, shows how old I am, just use the word humus, so yes. But anyway, the very stable fraction of organic matter increases the cation exchange capacity of soils, which is really kind of this, literally kind of a static electricity sort of power that organic matter has that helps hold nutrients in place, so it's not lost from the soil profile too quickly. So all of this is what organic matter does for us. If I had to say what's number 2 problem in New York State, I would say it's soil compaction, and the two are related, as I'll talk about shortly. But you know, part of it is from this kind of thing, this gross picture on the right, which I think I got from Paul Ceylon, NRCS or somebody. Heavy equipment on wet soils, please never do that. If you can at all avoid it, it leads to compaction problems that are so hard to get rid of. So we really want to, when we're managing soils, thinking a lot about building organic matter, maintaining organic matter, and doing everything we can to avoid chronic soil compaction or compaction that becomes so serious that it's a big job, an expensive job, and a long-term job to remediate. So it's another major constraint. Using a different kind of tillage okay. Moldboard plowing. Of the different types of tillages that we use, this one has a particular negative effect on compaction because of the pressure, really tremendous pounds of pressure on this lower part of the moldboard instruments, and can lead to a hard pan that develops there that's very, very hard to get rid of. There's this whole flipping of the soil. I know a lot of vegetable crop growers who feel it's really essential for disease control, et cetera. But we're seeing more and more farmers really moving away, at least from the moldboard plow, as well as from some other tillage instruments, and really something to think twice about in terms of tillage. So we have this cartoon we kind of collectively developed some years ago, talking about how you can get onto this kind of downward spiral of poor soil health that often begins with the compaction problem. And then you feel like you have to till and plow to get rid of that. That over-oxygenates the soil, and just leads to, just fans the flames, you might say, of organic matter burning away. What this really does, that over-oxygenation stimulates the microbes in the soil that break down organic matter. And while we need that to recycle the organic matter and get the nutrients out of the organic matter eventually for our crops, When you are over-tilling the soil, you're accelerating that rapid decomposition of organic matter faster than plants can use it and use the benefits of that. When you have less organic matter, you have unhealthy microbial communities, less sticky substances for good soil aggregation. That means you have poor drainage. That means when you go out there with equipment onto wet soils, you've got more compaction, and you go round and round and round and round. So we have to get away from that. And there's so many exciting things I think you'll see with this whole program about, and probably many of you are already aware, possibly more aware than I am, of some of the coolest new things coming along in terms of strip tillage and finger tillage and ways of, there's reasons, of course, why we have to till and plow the soil at times. But trying to confine that to the narrowest, the least amount of soil surface as possible, disturb the soil at the least that we possibly can. And lots of exciting things coming on, not just with what we're learning about biology and roots, but about what we're learning about tillage and how to till differently. So practices that actually enhance soil health, all of these here are really very much about reducing compaction and maximizing organic matter in the soil. So reducing tillage, so you're not fanning the flames of super rapid organic matter degradation. And all that carbon that was in the soil is now back into the air as the greenhouse gas CO2. And you have less organic matter from all the good things it does for the soil food web and for water holding capacity, et cetera. Maximizing vegetative cover, of course, this is really just, very intuitive. It's a matter of the longer you have vegetation out there, besides your cash crop, if in the fall and winter you can spring, you also can have some cover crops out there. They're sucking up CO2 from the atmosphere via photosynthesis, and some of that gets into our soil as organic matter. Using semi-perennial and perennial cropping systems when feasible or in rotation, for example, alfalfa for a few years, leads to less soil disturbance. And then directly adding organic matter. Simply directly adding organic matter, compost, mulches, manures, and biochars. And I think I'll have time to get into a few examples of these things. First of all, I wanted to get back to the soil compaction. I have this cool photograph I got from a colleague, Ray Wiles, quite a few years ago at the University of Maryland. This is showing canola, which was planted in a field with kind of a chronic soil compaction problem. And the canola was planted in part because its roots are good at getting through some compacted soil layers. And here's a underground photo using what's called a rhizotron to get a picture of that canola root in May. And here's a soybean root, the cash crop now, the main cash crop in the summer, following that exact same path that was created by the canola root. So that's what we mean by legacy effects of crops. Tillage radish, one of our big winners for compaction remediation. Boy, another area where just tons of research going on. I think Bob Porter, you'll be hearing probably from him. It's one of the seed companies involved in cover crops. We have a tool for determining, optimizing what cover crops you are growing. And of course, it's mind-boggling. I cannot keep up with the cover crop mixes that people are coming up with these days. But there's so much to look into here on cover crops, and really a fantastic area of exploration for farmers and for those of you that are supporting farmers in terms of optimizing not only what cover crops you grow, but when to plant them, how to manage them, how to terminate them, etc. One big thing about cover crops, I think I'll go over this quickly. It's really just this matter of, if all you have is your annual cash grain crop, in this case, and you're looking at, this is the y-axis here showing dry matter being produced. This is the only place where you're really contributing organic matter to the soil by that growth. If you have these fall planted winter cover crops, you also get this flip of a continued plant growth and contribution to organic matter for more of the season. And also you get protection from erosion, et cetera. So very important. There's a lot of barriers to working in fall winter cover crops into our cash crop systems. And so that's one of the challenges that you'll be talking more about in this program, I'm sure. I know Matt Ryan, for example, does a lot of work in this realm with organic farmers in particular. But so you might say, yes, I get the benefits of cover crops. I want to work them into my cash crop systems, but we have a short growing season and how to do it. As I say, I've got the easy job of just giving the overview here. The devil's in the details, and we'll leave it for some speakers to come in terms of all the things that are going on in terms of accomplishing that. Literally adding organic matter and soil amendments to the soil. I mean, there's no faster way actually to build up organic matter in soil than to add compost, but you have to use lots and lots of compost to do that. We find some of the, for example, small scale organic farmers are able to do this. On a large scale, it's a little more difficult to add enough compost to build up organic matter very quickly, but still it can serve other purposes. This is actually a picture from South Africa where a very large tomato producer in South Africa had chronic soil-borne root disease problems with tomatoes, which was their major cash crop. And they tried everything, including using more and more and more pesticides, every year to try to get rid of these pathogens, with little success. But they came up with a compost mix that really worked for them. And then they became believers in soil health because they saw all kinds of other benefits from the organic matter that the compost brought with them. Biochar I only briefly mentioned because it's something I'm sure you probably all hear about out there. Johannes Lehmann at Cornell is really the guru of biochar. The potential of biochar is kind of, just to explain it briefly, it's a matter of taking any kind of organic waste that you might have on a farm. Everything, it could be from manure to apple or vineyard clippings from prunings, to other types of waste. Even you can use waste from urban areas or whatever. Burning it at a slow burn under low oxygen, you can, by burning any kind of waste, just like by burning, fuel wood in your wood stove, you can get energy out of that. So first of all, just burning the waste, but using it this slow oxygen process called pyrolysis, low oxygen, slow burn. You get a lot of bang for your buck. You get a lot of energy for the amount of CO2 emitted in the burning of that. So you get energy. And then what you're left with is this charcoal-like stuff, this biochar it's almost exclusively carbon. It's not, loaded with nutrients, but it does have cation exchange capacity, for example, which will help hold nutrients in the soil. It helps improve soil structure. There's evidence that it may create habitats for some beneficial mycorrhizal fungi, for example. Johannes is doing some new research using, for example, liquid manure waste from dairies to fortify biochar with nutrients before putting it in, so it's not just carbon. It's also very stable carbon that stays in the soil for a long time, is not prone to microbial breakdown, and will keep carbon out of the atmosphere as CO2 for a long period of time. So interesting area, emerging area of research. So in general, kind of, soil health is really, it's something that it's hard to find anybody who's, not, once they hear the story, not in favor of thinking about soil health and how to build some better soil health, because it's a win-win story. Building soil organic matter in these various ways we talked about, reducing tillage, winter cover cropping, using compost manure as more perennial crops. All of these things increases resilience to drought, flooding, and erosion, which is becoming, as you know, a bigger problem in our area due to climate change. And also as part of the mitigation story when it comes to climate change. It's storing carbon in the soil that otherwise would be in the air as the greenhouse gas CO2. So it's a real win-win story. Using organic nitrogen sources rather than synthetic nitrogen fertilizers is another thing, because when you're doing this, instead of putting on urea or ammonium nitrate purchased from the local agway or whatever, that's only putting on nitrogen. When you're using these organic sources, you're also adding organic matter. And the other thing to think about is synthetic nitrogen fertilizers are very energy intensive to produce. It's about 4 to 6 tons of carbon emitted into the air as a greenhouse gas, CO2, per ton of nitrogen manufactured. So using organic sources of nitrogen is something that's really definitely part of a soil health strategy. We did a really interesting survey. A person working with our team a couple years ago, Cedric Mason, pulled a lot of this together. We surveyed close to 200 farmers across the state at various stages of adopting soil health practices. And we looked for what they identified as some of the benefits they were seeing, some of the constraints and the barriers, and then how long it took to reach some of these benefits. And the green here is representing cover crops, the beige is representing reducing tillage, and the brown is looking at amendments like directly adding compost and such. And so this is the percent of those that we surveyed, and what percent of them felt that they saw improved drainage, better drought resilience, and less erosion. And you can see more than half, over 60% of those farmers using cover cropping and reduced tillage saw benefits of all 3 of those categories. The next thing we tried to do is we set up the survey in such a way that we asked farmers at the front end whether they were early beginners with soil health, have been using soil health practices for just a few years, all the way up to farmers who've been using soil health practices for 20 or more years. So look at how long does it take to see some of the benefits of soil health. If I'm going to invest in some of these things to build the health of my soil, is it going to happen in 1 year, 2 years? People are telling me organic matter takes years to build up, that kind of thing. So that's what we did with this. So these are just a few of the results we got. This particular graph is looking at, and here we've got, this is farmers who were kind of new to soil health practices, 1 to 5 years of using soil health practices, 5 to 10 years all the way to 20 plus or more. How many of those farmers using reduced tillage felt that they saw less erosion and had fewer sedimentation repairs in terms of trenches and such? And you see, even those who hadn't been doing it for long, we're seeing a large majority, we're seeing those benefits. I'm virtually all of them using it for a long time, seeing that benefit. But it took over time, the benefits increased. This is asking a different question. Reduced tillage, has that actually reduced the need for fertilizer inputs, your expenses for fertilizer? And here you see a very different story. First of all, even those who have been doing reduced tillage for 20 something years, less than half, about half perhaps, feeling they're really seeing a benefit in terms of reducing fertilizer costs, and less than 20%. So that takes a long time to see that benefit, is the story of that, okay? And the benefits, there's sort of a top out of that. If you're using reduced tillage to think you're going to reduce your fertilizer inputs, that alone is not going to get you there. This was a question asking about cover crops. Are you actually seeing, do you actually think you're seeing better yields associated with the fact that you started using cover crops some years ago? And here we see again, farmers using it a long time are seeing more benefits in terms of actually increasing yields. But even those who are just beginning with cover crops, 40% saying that they're seeing increased yields. But there are some benefits that can happen in year 1. And here's this picture here is talking about the problem with terrible, we're getting more and more frequent heavy rainfall events. And this is becoming a really chronic problem, part of a changing weather pattern in our region. And you can have huge losses of soil, which of course is something that can take generations to replace actually. I've had farmers say, well, yeah, I started using cover crops thinking about building up organic matter. I knew that would take some years to see that benefit. It takes some time for organic matter to build up. But I can tell you in year 1, it happened. We got these heavy rainfall events. I had cover crops out there. Here's an example of someone who had a cover crop plus using reduced tillage, same rainfall event. In year 1, I saw the benefit of my cover crops from reduced erosion. So I think we've kind of a little bit overplayed our mantra to farmers about adopting these soil health practices, you have to be very patient. It takes years and years. Yes, it does take some years if your focus is exclusively on building up a major buildup of organic matter. But you can see benefits such as reduced erosion in year 1 with cover crops. You can see another example in year 1 is saving money on labor and fuel by reducing tillage, for example. So some benefits come along quite quickly. It's not all long term. So where do we go from here? I've just got a couple slides left. I know I'm sure Joseph's starting to look at the clock now. I think my time's almost up. So, I feel very fortunate that my career has been spent here at Cornell, where I think the farmers here in New York State but my colleagues at Cornell and in our extension system, we've really been kind of at the fore. We have not been at the back of the bus on this story nationally or internationally. We've really been at the forefront of the soil health movement, particularly the soil health test you'll know more about. But where do we go from here? What are the priorities for research, outreach, and policy in the future? And this is something I think all of you would be interested to hear from all of you after you go through this program of what your thoughts are about this. But we put together a couple of years ago, the New York Soil Health team, a statewide, actually a regional summit on this topic. Had really leaders, some leader farmers, leader agencies, all the agencies you might imagine, including a lot of nonprofits involved in some of the stuff. People from, this is Pat Hooker from Ag Markets, speaking to us about where do we go from here. Put a lot of thoughts of, developing a roadmap for the next steps. And I just advise you to go to newyorksoilhealth.org and you can get a PDF of the document we came up with, this roadmap. It's about a 25-page document filled with lots of great information, a lot of background information on soil health in general. It has this kind of stuff I've been talking about, kind of defining what soil health is, some of the on and off farm costs and benefits, unique challenges and opportunities. But really, we came up with also some real goals for the future. And you can read it yourself, but number one is really building, and you're part of it now, all of you, a stakeholder framework for collaboration, communication, and priority setting for the future. Identifying steps to overcome barriers to adoption of soil health practices from farmers who are interested, but have questions about how do I get into this? How do I start this? How costly is it going to be? Integrating soil health with climate change policy, research, and outreach, because it has that mitigation benefit. And then also integrating soil health with water quality and nutrient management policy, research, and outreach. So these two are kind of environmental interactions of soil health. This overcoming the barriers is the big one for those of you working with farmers that I think, I hope the program you have in front of you, what you'll be seeing, helps you understand more about, and you can put your own thoughts to that. So I think with that, Joseph, I must be near the end of my time. And I think that's my last slide. So we have hard copies of this too, but with everything Zoom these days, I guess I have to suggest you go to the PDF at newyorksoilhealth.org to see the